Greetings, everyone. We're back on the Real Work Show, and we're back with my new friend, Andrew, who's a defense attorney. Andrew.
Hey,
Andrew just survived the lightning round, even within time, which is even tougher, especially for a lawyer that probably likes to talk.
I was surprised by myself.
I bet. I bet. I'm sure that's part of the job, keeping your communication concise.
It is
Uh,
very much so.
Awesome. So now we'll be able to have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation for those that are interested in this work. I'm sure there'll be lots of people that'll be interested in this. So one of the questions I asked you in the lightning round was kind of why law? I think you mentioned you were pretty young when you decided that this is something you wanted to do. I think you mentioned like 7 years old, something like that. Uh,
Yeah,
but you mentioned something interesting that about. I remember you mentioned curiosity, and you mentioned kind of liking to argue. Can
yeah.
you expound a little on that and how those traits help you in your work?
Um, well, so the curiosity first. I mean, part of what you're doing in every case is digging into a set of facts and digging into someone's life. And the details are so important because oftentimes cases will turn on one or two factual details that you need to have a handle on, or one or two factual details that you can use to craft your argument for someone.
Right.
And you only get to that by being curious, by being interested in your cases, by being interested in your clients and their lives, because necessarily what you're doing in my job is you are involving yourself in clients' lives to an extent that just about no one else in their lives has. You're
Right.
dealing with very personal issues.
Right.
uh, and so being curious is crucial to that, to understanding who they are and understanding what the case is.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and in terms of the argument, I mean, to be a defense lawyer, you're necessarily walking into a room where the temperature of the room is against you, if I can put it that way. You've got on the other side, you've got a crown, you've got a police force, and you'll have a system that is its job is to ensure public safety, which means its job is to ensure that if people do something bad, they get punished.
Right.
They get categorized as someone who's done that.
Right.
And so oftentimes you're pretty much all you've got for your clients. So you need to have a bit of that, I don't want to say contrarian nature to you,
Right.
but you've got to have that ability to sort of take on the less popular arguments, the less popular causes, and be willing to fight for them.
Right. So a few things that are interesting about that. So is there a line somewhere? I'm guessing the answer is yes, but maybe it's difficult to define. Is there a line between uh, being involved in your client situation and being too involved, or caring too much? Is that something?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you care too much, you can't do the job for your client because your judgment gets clouded. I mean, you have to have a dispassionate part to you. So while it's an excellent question, because while you have to be willing to take on a cause, you also have to be detached enough to know what the weaknesses are in your argument or in your case. I mean, you don't serve your clients well if you think everyone who walks in your office is innocent and has been wronged by the state. Like, there are lots of times when someone is guilty because they're guilty and the evidence against them is overwhelming. You have to be able to tell them that. Or if there's an argument that is available to you but it isn't going to win, you have to have that detachment to be able to identify that. And then, like, the further part of that is caring too much. I mean, you can, if you take your clients' cases on to the extent where it's personally affecting you deeply, then you're going to burn yourself out at some point. You
Yeah.
have to care about your clients, to
Sure.
care about your causes, but you can't, wear it on your soul.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think of that expression. Lots of people give advice like, it's not good to take your work home. You need to leave your work at the office. I've often thought about certain jobs. A police officer would be a good example. A paramedic is one I always think about. Imagine if you're the first on the scene of a horrible accident, and then you have to go home and kind of live a normal life. I would imagine the same kind of thing for you. You kind of have to know how to draw the lines.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to bring your work home in this job. You're always going to be thinking about your cases. You know, you wake up and, every defense lawyer has woken up in the middle of the night with a thought about a case.
Sure.
Or you're in the shower and you're thinking about your cases, or you're relaxing at the end of the night and your brain never really turns off.
Yes.
Or you're at a party and someone says something and it triggers you about a case you're working on. So that's just natural. If you're doing this job well, that's happening for you.
Right.
The problem is when it goes too far, when you take your losses home
Right.
with you, when you take your wins too far in your own mind, or when you shut everything else out, just because all you want to do is work on your cases, that'll put you on a mental burnout track. Like, it's not sustainable.
Right. Right. Oh, that's super interesting. This is probably obvious, but I'm sure a big part of your job is, you mentioned, crafting appropriate arguments, understanding the law, understanding the facts of the case, and then crafting an appropriate argument. How do you? I'm interested in the process of how you test your arguments. So because you mentioned, you got your own biases.
Yeah,
You're a human being.
yeah.
How are you sure that you've got arguments that won't be, your bias is not affecting them and they won't be effective in the courtroom?
Part of it is your own experience. This is a job where you get better,
Right.
in that sense, in
Right.
the sense of the judgment part of it.
Yes.
Um, you get a more attuned judgment
Right.
for the most part. And I'm not saying it's only like when you're at the 10-year mark where that happens. It's after a couple of years when you're doing these cases, you find the needle sort of stabilizes for you.
Okay.
But the other part of it is colleagues. And for legal arguments, it's, it's such a collegial profession that we're constantly talking to each other about each other's cases. And then with jury trials, I talk to family and friends. I'll pull them aside and say, like, I've had numerous conversations with family who are, or friends who are invariably interested in the cases because they're often, that's the nature of defense work. They're crime, they're salacious or interesting cases. And I'll sit friends and family down and say, these are the facts, and this is what the defense is, and this is an argument. And for jury trials, I actually find they're better to bounce that stuff off of than other lawyers, because it's your community members and just lay people who are going to be your judges.
Isn't that interesting? Uh,
Yeah.
so the cases that you take on, again, you made a comment I think it was in the lightning round, about a common misconception. People thinking, like you see in the movies, someone comes in tears, I'm innocent, please help me. I think you made a comment about that's a bit of a misconception. Doesn't happen very often. How much freedom do you have to select your cases? If someone's presented before you, is it your call, or is it kind of handed to you and they say, Andrew, go make it happen?
So I have a bit of an old school mentality on that. Generally speaking, I will take any case that comes in my door if it fits within my expertise, which is criminal defense law, and the remuneration is such that I'll take it.
Right.
That's it. I mean, I don't turn away cases based on what someone's been charged with. I
Okay.
don't turn away cases for any reasons of any moral considerations. It's just, do I have the expertise to take the case? Which is a bit of an old school view of things, but generally speaking, that's how it is. If I feel there's whatever, like say a personality conflict that would develop between me and my client, I will say to them, you may have better luck with another lawyer because
Right.
you need to have confidence in your lawyer. But other than that, there's nothing I turn down.
That's interesting. I had another question about that because, I guess, largely from movies I've seen and things like that, I'm always thinking there must be potential, especially on the defense side, to have moral dilemmas. So have you had situations? Obviously, you don't have to give any specifics, but have you had situations where you did feel a bit conflicted? You believe or know that the individual is guilty, but you need to represent them anyway. And how do you kind of reconcile that if it has happened?
So, I mean, the whole system, let me back up. If you think about it, every case you take on has the potential to be a moral dilemma as a defense lawyer, in the sense that there is a risk
Yes.
that a guilty person who has done something wrong that society has thought serious enough that they made it a crime, that they will escape from any sort of sentence or punishment for it.
Right.
And in the cases of a violent offense, that's especially true. So anytime a case walks in that door, if you look at it on that meta level,
Yep.
we are, as defense lawyers, essentially inviting moral quandaries all the time.
Right.
The thing of it is that I've never lost a wink of sleep over that, because we've seen what the flip side to not having this system we've created is. And I mean, it was true up to a few years ago. I think it still is true. My understanding is Eddie Greenspan used to say this, no system of, no country that had an adversarial system ever devolved into tyranny. And I don't know historically how true that is. But in modern times, certainly we see a real strong parallel between adversarial criminal justice systems and ideas of democracies and personal freedoms. This system is set up for a very good reason. And so within that system, we are generally speaking able to manage our moral quandaries. And it's not a question for me when a client comes in as to whether I think they're guilty or not. It's about whether the state has enough evidence to prove they're guilty.
That's a really, really one of the most clear explanations I've ever heard. It's how you see your job is not, you're not playing God. Your job is to present the other side of the coin, basically, and then kind of let the chips fall where they may. It's like the scales of justice.
Well, exactly. Like, you know, a client comes in and I say to them, look, you're clearly guilty here. You know, I would be morally compromised by arguing your case. And that's simply, on a system-wide level, then what you're left with is essentially people standing up by themselves without a trained lawyer being forced to defend themselves. And how does that work in the long run? Well, it works very poorly.
Sure.
It means a lot more people get found guilty who shouldn't be. And so I've never lost 1 second of sleep on that wavelength.
Okay.
Where there's a distinction, though, is I won't lead arguments that are morally reprehensible, that have no chance of winning. So a classic example would be if a Holocaust denier was charged with some offense and comes into my office. Do I defend them? Yes. Do I defend them by saying a defense is that the Holocaust actually didn't happen? No.
Right.
I don't make that argument. My client can't force me to pick the argument I make to defend them.
Isn't that interesting? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that kind of comes down to what I guess the word popping into my head is integrity. You, to a certain extent, maybe to a large extent, maybe 100%, need to believe the argument you're providing.
Yes, you know, and it's so important. That works for every profession where you're trying to convince somebody to do something. It's true in sales. It's true in politics.
Yes, yes.
You know, you can't lobby somebody if you don't believe your position. You can't sell something if you don't believe in your product, because people have, you know, we have, you know, thousands and thousands of years of subconscious training to be able to pick out signals from people that they don't believe what they're saying.
Yes, yes.
And so, you know, if I don't believe the argument I'm putting forward, judges and juries, anybody will pick up on that.
Right.
Okay? Even if you can't explain it, there's something about the person where you're like, they just don't buy this.
Yes.
They're just not buying what they're trying to sell me. So
that'd be a BS detector on the street. That's what they say.
It sure is. It sure is. And you know, jury members are as good at that as judges are, and you don't need legal training for that.
Right.
It's just the sense you get off someone.
Super interesting. Andrew, on a different topic, and I always like this question because there's been a lot of discussion these days about potential disconnect between the education system and you know the working life. In other words, to what extent does the education system prepare people for the workforce? And so I'm interested in your experience. What did you do in terms of education prior to law school? And I'm interested in how well do you think, kind of two sides of it. How well do you think your bachelor degree prepared you for law school? How well do you think your law school education prepared you for the work that you're doing now? You can kind of respond to both of those pieces.
So undergrad was a specialist degree from the University of Toronto in economics and political science.
Okay.
It was essentially like a double major.
Okay.
And then I went to law school at U of T as soon as I was finished my undergrad there. So I stayed on campus. In terms of undergrad, I know it's a popular parlor game or a popular argument at parties to say my undergrad, I learned like 5 things in undergrad and none of them matter.
Right.
That's not true for what I do. I learned a lot in undergrad about how to read critically, how to craft an argument, about concepts that resonate throughout my professional life.
Right.
So I thought the training that I got was important from the sense of my own intellectual development at that time, teaching me to be a better reader, teaching me to be a better thinker, and teaching me to be a better writer. I took it seriously, and I felt it was an important step for me.
Right.
So I think I'm probably in the minority. And I'm also lucky in that my profession sort of matches the sorts of tools, like my profession requires the tools that undergrad developed. So I enjoyed my time in undergrad and I thought it was helpful. For law school, it was very helpful. I loved my time in law school. I loved the people I met there. I loved my professors. I was lucky because I came in with a plan as to what I wanted to do, and I'll say here I was in the incredibly strong minority on that. Most people, fairly enough, go into law school with an open mind, saying, "I want to see what grabs me,"
Right.
which is great. I knew what I wanted. And so I was able to plan those 3 years for what I wanted to do and focus on the classes I wanted to focus on. And in terms of your ability to read cases, to think about legal concepts,
Yeah.
to develop your analytical thinking, I thought it was a great 3 years. So I thought it prepared me well. Now, does it take you all the way to preparing you to be a lawyer? No. There's such a steep learning curve when you start articling and then practicing in law. It's very steep. But that's like law school is not there to like teach you how to be a fully practicing litigating lawyer. They're here to give you tools that you need to have as part of your base.
No, I think that's super helpful. And I mean, even from my own experience, the conversations I've had with people in different professions, I find what you just said is probably true in a lot of dimensions of life, and not just professional life either. I mean, when people talk about talk to someone that's not yet married, you know, are you ready to be a husband? No matter what your answer is, no, you're not really. Are you ready to be a father? No, not really.
Absolutely,
like,
I agree entirely. Like, you know, there's so much that goes into training you to be a dad. So let's take the father example. But man, until like that first night when, you know, you're in that hospital room and baby's crying and now it's the buck stops with you and your partner, or just you, if it's just you.
Yeah, it gets real quick.
It's different, but that learning curve feels really steep at that moment, no matter how many parenting classes you took or how many conversations you had with other parents.
Yeah.
Different ball game now, but you don't want to dissuade all that other stuff. Like you learn before you become a parent, and you do get a base of knowledge that you do end up using.
Right, right. I think that what we just said is a really good lens for that overall argument about how well the education system prepares you for work. I just think could the education system in some areas do a better job preparing people for certain jobs? I absolutely believe that from my own experience, applying for jobs, my own experience recruiting people. I do believe that. Right on the other hand, will it ever fully do that? No. I think some of the traits that it take to be successful in business, for example, you never get them by reading. We had an
Yeah.
interview the other day, and I talked to a guy about the likability factor. Whether you're in a rock musician or I'm sure in your work, what if none of your colleagues wanted to talk to you? Would they care that you're a genius at preparing arguments? What if they all thought you were a jerk? Right?
Oh
So,
yeah. Yeah, and judges too. I mean, in my
right,
line of work, if you alienate judges, I mean,
right,
you may still win because judges are generally speaking quite good at being able to focus on the argument. But
yes,
part of what you have to do as a litigator is engage people and intrigue people. And if you can't do that because of whatever, for whatever reason, that has nothing to do with your ability to read a case,
right, right.
your success chances will necessarily decrease.
Right. And that's not something you learned you don't learn to be a nice person or good with people by sitting in law school, I'm sure, any more than you do any other job, right?
No, I mean, Mark, you're absolutely right. You can't learn that. I mean, I've heard that like in med school they have a bedside manners class. I don't know if that's true or not,
Right.
because but it would make some sense if you did, because as a patient you need to have faith in your doctor,
Sure.
and that belief will help you in terms of battling whatever it is.
Right.
I mean, but there's only so much of that you can do until you're in the field itself. So I mean, it's just not something that can be trained for.
Right. Right. It's kind of like your point earlier about you can't really fake caring. Like if you don't care, uh, even
Yeah,
if you try and fake it, people will pick up on it, right? So
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Andrew, this is really, really interesting. One thing before we close off, you talked a little bit about the type of work that you do outside the courtroom. I have a feeling whether it's real or not, people probably have a pretty good idea, what life is like within the courtroom, at least from the news and to a lesser extent from TV and movies. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do outside the courtroom? What that kind of looks like on a day-to-day basis?
A lot of preparation, meeting with clients, talking to them about their cases. Either if they're in custody, you do that at the jail, or they have bail, then at your office. Reading evidence, right? You're entitled, if you're charged with an offense, to have a copy of all the evidence that might be relevant for your case. My job as a lawyer, if it's a trial file that I have, is to go through that, every word of it, and consider it. Go out and interview witnesses. Go out and visit the scene. Draft your questions for witnesses. Draft arguments that are going to come out at trial. Research case law. For appeals, it's similar, right? You get the transcript from the trial below. You read every word of it. You look at all the exhibits. You do research and you draft. So a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of talking to people. Those are the key things. A lot of phone calls being made. It's, even though a lot of it's done in your office, it's a very active sitting, if I can
Right.
put it that way.
Right. Okay. Andrew, we've talked around a lot of different pieces. The conversation's been, at least from my perspective, has been super, super interesting. There could be people watching this. Hopefully, there are people watching this that are seriously considering moving this in this direction. Either just being a lawyer, generally speaking, not sure they want to be involved in litigation, or they know, like you did, I want to be in litigation. I want to be a defense attorney, for example. Any final words that you would want to leave them with? Let's say that they're in high school, they're in an undergrad degree, they're headed in this direction. Any words of advice that you would give them about moving in that direction?
So to be a defense attorney is incredibly rewarding. You are helping people at their most vulnerable, at their most embarrassed, at their most scared. But you need to really want to do it. This is not a job that you can just sort of slide your way in and out of. You got to believe in it. You got to want to do it. You it almost has to be at the point where you need to do it.
Right.
And you have to be comfortable that it is a job that you can live with. You can live with the stress of doing, where your personal moral code fits that societal moral code that we've talked about, and that you understand how hard the work is. Not in terms of it's difficult work to grasp, but you are dealing with high stakes work almost all the time, and you have to care, because if you stop caring, you're not going to do a good job.
Right.
And so if you can satisfy all those things and you're a curious person who wants to help people, then it is incredibly rewarding.
That's awesome. Very, very powerful. Thank you so much, Andrew, for the conversation. And for all of you, please subscribe. We've got a whole diverse set of interviewees from all different types of work. And again, our intent is to help you get a better idea of those different types of jobs, what the work is really like, not what you might think, not just the misconceptions, and hopefully you can connect with work that you love. Thanks so much. Be sure to subscribe and check out other interviews. Thanks so much, Andrew.
My pleasure, Mark. Take care.